In southern Afghanistan, another bombing rocking the country. The Islamic State claiming responsibility for a deadly suicide bombing on a Shiite mosque in Kandahar. Yesterday's bombing left 47 dead. Today, families of the victims buried their bodies. The attack came just a week after a bombing claimed by the local Islamic State affiliate killed 46 people at another Shiite mosque in the north of the country. The blast is deepening concerns that in the aftermath of the Taliban takeover, other militant groups are gaining strength in the country. Joining me now to help us assess the current situation in Afghanistan is Jamil Jaffer. He is the founder and director of the National Security Institute. Thank you so much for taking some time this weekend for us.
Thanks for having me, Ruby.
So the Islamic State, as I just mentioned, has taken responsibility for yet another mosque bombing in Afghanistan. This follows the airport bombing, of course, which they claimed responsibility for. And when you think about how things have changed, 20 years ago, before we invaded Afghanistan, the Taliban and al-Qaeda were considered our biggest threat. Now the U.S. can only hope that the Taliban can gain some ground to stand up to the Islamic State, right?
Right. It's actually kind of astounding. The Taliban were the very people who actually allowed Osama bin Laden to operate out of Afghanistan on 9/11, planning those attacks and the lead up to it. And now, of course, we have ISIS-K. We have other al-Qaeda groups that are operating in Afghanistan. And the Taliban are once again in charge. And you have to wonder, I mean, there's clearly a rivalry going on between ISIS-K and the Taliban. And yet we know that other groups like the Haqqani Network, a U.S.-listed terrorist group, are part of the Taliban government. So it's a real challenging situation for the United States, for our allies, for the Americans that are left there in Afghanistan. And let's not forget the 20,000 plus Afghan allies who fought and worked alongside us that are still left in that country.
And let's talk about the botched drone attack. The Pentagon now offering unspecified payments and donations to the family members of the 10 civilians, including 7 children who were killed in the attack in the final days before the American withdrawal. Would this have happened if there weren't journalists on the ground, the New York Times, there breaking that story?
Look, I think it's hard to know what we would have known had the New York Times not been there, had not had their digital team looking at all these various videos and the footage and the like. Obviously the problem here, though, is this is what happens when you try to conduct a sort of war on terrorism from a distance, right? It's very hard if you don't have assets on the ground, really identifying who's there, what the intelligence is. Our current plan is to do this over-the-horizon counterterrorism strategy. The reality is there are terrorist groups in Afghanistan, but if we're going to operate from a distance, it's going to cause more challenges like this. And this was a terrible, awful, unfortunate mistake. And I'm glad the United States is doing the right thing by offering compensation to the family, by offering to bring the family to the United States. But obviously, it's a situation none of us wish it happened at all.
And this is not the first time. I mean, let's be clear about that. There have been drone attacks used throughout the last 2 administrations that have killed civilians in Afghanistan. So this is not a new or unique phenomenon. Is it safe to say that Afghanistan is on the brink of humanitarian catastrophe if it isn't already there?
Rudy, I think that's exactly right. I mean, look, you have a lot of folks there who are feeling under pressure from the Taliban government, women, human rights activists, all of the Afghan allies that we have. And they're not able to pull together an effective governing structure, in part because they're not working with the United States and the rest of our allies to make this happen. And so you have a really challenging situation when you have the Taliban in power and a country that is starved for natural resources and for monetary resources. So we have a very difficult situation happening in Afghanistan. We're going to see a huge refugee flow. We saw this in the Syria conflict. This is a dangerous situation, could cause more militancy. And, it could have been handled differently, and that's the real shame here. There's more work for the U.S. to do. We've got to get back in there, protect our people, protect the Americans there, and help the Afghan people get their government, the right government, in power. It's going to help them come out of this in a better way.
Do you have confidence that that can happen? Because the Taliban clearly an inept government. The previous U.S.-backed government also inept.
Yeah. Look, it's a very difficult situation. Obviously, a lot of corruption, a lot of challenges in Afghanistan. I do believe the Afghan people want a government that works for them. I think the Afghan people don't want to see ISIS-K there. They don't want to see these bombings at Shia mosques. This is a huge problem. And look, they clearly didn't support the United States being there, right? There were challenges with that operation. That being said, we have very important national interests at stake. And the way we departed did not do anyone any good, not the Afghan people, not our allies, and certainly not our own national security.
All right, Jamil Jaffer, thank you so much for taking some time for us. He is the founder and director of the National Security Institute. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.